Bonjour à tous. Merci à tous et à toutes de vous être joints à la conférence de ce soir. Mon nom est Hoy, je suis chargé de projet pour la compagnie Forward Movement. Donc, l'équipe est honorée d'accueillir P-Boogie, 7 Star et Samayam pour la conférence de cette semaine. Thank you everyone for tuning in. My name is Hoy. I'm a project manager for Forward Movement. The team is honored to welcome P-Boogie, 7 Star, and Samayam for this week's panel. So before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to introduce our panelists. So Pierre P-Boogie is an activist from Pacoima, California. He's been advocating for social justice all around the world for the past decade. Over the years, he has been awarded multiple awards and fellowships for his involvement in social and community development. He is also known as the co-founder of the Great One-Eighters, a grassroots collective of artists, athletes, and activists utilizing hip-hop culture to uplift and empower their community in the San Fernando Valley. So after a decade of building the movement, they opened the Unite Cultural Center in 2019. Unite is a hub for youth and community development through creative transformation, civic engagement, and collective healing. Vlad, 7 Star, is the second panelist with us today. So 7 Star is a pioneer in the Canadian crumb scene. In 2005, he co-founded the first crumb collective in Canada, the Berserk Squad. He's also known for organizing the Gotozone Festival, the first and most ambitious Canadian crumb festival. He has judged and competed in the most prestigious events all around the world. Over the years, he has gained his peers' recognition and respect, also through his involvement in various communities as an artist and as president of the Montreal Crump Alliance, a nonprofit promoting crump culture. As a performing and engaged artist, he has been awarded multiple awards such as the prestigious Victor Martin Lynch Stoughton Award given by the Canada Arts Council. And today our host is Samayam, representing the Chalet camp. Samayam Muntola is an artist in motion. She's taking part in the conversation as an ambassador of the Chalet camp organization. She started with dance at a young age, and her love of music led her to singing and songwriting. Her diverse palette has brought her to many collaborations in the city, a member of community, and for many years taught and traveled through the medium of hip-hop dance and whacking. She's also part of the Chalet Camp family. So Chalet Camp is a nonprofit organization where youth members and adults actively work together to create a safe space for youth between ages 11 and 18. The organization is located in the neighborhood of Côte-des-Neiges, a borough on the island of Montreal, situated on the traditional unceded Mohawk territory. So I'll leave it to you, Sam. Thank you for joining us again.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. So we're here on this panel discussion. I am, as Hoy has mentioned, that I am here on behalf of Chalet Kent. We are actually here in the meeting space with my team and also some youth. And I'm very happy to be honored to actually speak with you guys. Again, you guys are doing amazing work. And yes, so wonderful to see you, Pierre P-Boogie and Vladimir 7 Star. How's it going?
We're good, chilling.
You're good, yes. Oh man, it's so awesome to actually be in this space with you guys. I know I've probably interacted with you guys a lot differently, obviously throughout the years, and it's really nice to come and actually just have this really one-on-one conversation with you guys as you know, we're doing a lot of good things here. So I guess we'll get started because we got the introduction out of the way. So since you're here, Vladimir, I see you, you're there chilling. I would like to ask you, like, with your background in Crump and being a huge part in the building here, the Crump community here in Montreal, here in Canada, why do you think community is so important?
Well, the reason why my energy was so dedicated to community is because when you want to create an environment that is real, that is strong, you have to be able to do it from a community perspective. It can't just be, I know that a lot of times where we get involved into arts and all that as youths, we are attracted by the glamour. We want to make money off of it. We want to shine. We're just looking at our idols and we just wish that we were out there, you know, touring with them and all that as dancers, for example. But then the reality is that when you get involved with the real world, you realize that there's more than what we see out there, what's being put on your face and what you fall in love with, like the first image that comes to mind. And you realize there are deeper values that could be channeled through the art and all of that. So when I realized that at a very early stage, I told myself, well, there's way more that we could do with this whole crump thing than just be out there and be the coolest kids, you know, out there performing. There's so much more to it. So while you start reflecting, you start thinking about the depth of the culture, and you start traveling, you start really doing your research and understanding the roots of what you're doing, you're realizing that there's so much more to it. And that automatically leads you to in a direction where you have to share it with more of a community approach, you know, opposed to just something that's superficial, you know. So I think that's why community is so important, because I feel like through community work, you could really pass down some strong values and make a real change that you can't really achieve if you only stay at the surface, you know. So that's why for me it's so important.
And I guess too, it has a lot to do with like us, you know, maturing with our art and our dance, right?
Yeah.
Because as you said, when we only see, I guess, the surface or the glamour of it, and once we get there and we see behind it, we see, okay, there's so much more to go. So with that, I guess, in mind, could we say that with the community as well, do you also see the growth? And I guess I would like to also invite Pierre into the conversation, but finishing on your note, Vlad, do you see that now that you have contributed and locked in with the community, do you see the growth, like that change from when they first started into now?
Yes, definitely. There's so many aspects. We've been able to create an environment that is more welcoming, you know, obviously the growth of the community in numbers. That is definitely something that we've seen. Also, the fact that I'm able to uh, work on bigger projects. We wouldn't be able to have, like, the city of Laval, for example, investing money into Gutter Zone if there wasn't like a community behind it, if we didn't have anything to show for. So there is a clear evolution and growth in numbers, but there's also a clear evolution and growth when it comes to when you look at the people who are teaching now. When we started, it was only me, Taminator, Pez, Jigsaw, and now you have all of this new generation of people who are out there that are teaching either in schools, community centers, that are initiating certain projects that are related to the art, related to the culture. So I'm definitely seeing a huge change. And the thing is, as a community leader, what we need to keep in mind, well, for myself personally, is that this is a constant evolution that never stops. There's never an end. There's never an end point. We're always growing, and things are changing. Everything around us is changing, and we need to find ways and be open to adapt to those changes while remaining true to our essence, you know.
Definite.
Yeah, most definitely. And just to add to what Seven Star was really mentioning, I think driving home is just the importance of centering youth around, you know, your approach to community development, and how the importance of building community around any type of, you know, arts or culture initiative is to create that kind of like continuum for the person, right? That it's not just them engaging with this art form and this culture passively, that they're actually now not only being part of it, but they're innovating, they're teaching, they're growing, they're building the culture, which then effectively really gives not only them buy-in into the culture and into continuing this as a lifelong process, but also develops them in that role as community leaders, as Seven Star was mentioning, really passing on that torch and making sure that this culture, because really what we're talking about is hip hop culture and the premises of hip hop culture, right? And so it makes sure that this culture remains a youth-led, youth-driven culture, and that we don't, as adults and as we get older, take for granted and start adulterating hip hop as something that it's not.
That's a very interesting concept that you just brought up there. Because I think a lot of that is about that intergenerational connection that we need, right? So even as when we started, we were young, we were either in our teens or even younger, some even college. And again, that the newness of wanting to know what that was very, very, very important for our, I guess, attraction. And understanding that it gave us a voice, right? So when we didn't think that we were, had that power, this kind of gave us that expression to say what we wanted to say. And I think that really brings, I said, I'll keep it with you, Pierre, like, now that we find that connection, like between art and community, like how were you aware of that effectiveness actually to empower, like to bring that to, because you started young, right? You started as a young youth, right? And then you brought it as you became an adult. How was that process?
Yeah, I'm still coping with transitioning to an adult. I did like an open mic with a youth coalition out here in LA earlier this week. And, they had all the youth, the young ones go up and they're like, now we're going to go to our adult allies, P-Boogie. And I was like, damn, so I think for me, my journey, it started, prior to me really even being part of hip hop in that respect and being part of the culture. I was really introduced to arts and culture through music, and it was through creating music at school, right? So I was in the school band, and I started learning keyboard there. I started learning tuba. I started learning bass, and that was my introduction to my creative self, and in those times, honestly, it was for me, I was not really understanding even what I was engaging in at the time, but it was something that I was gravitating to because I was starved for that human connection. My parents are both immigrants. My mom is Salvadorian, my dad's Mexican. My mom escaped from the Civil War in El Salvador and came to this country, and my dad fled his pueblo for greater opportunity because he himself was pretty much the lone child who was left by his parents in that respect. And so for me growing up, they try to keep a really close, tight niche, within our own immigrant community out here in Pacoima. And it was like, you don't leave the house, whether you're out there doing good or bad. So being able to participate in the art for me and in band and in creating music opened me up to a whole nother world that I was in a lot of ways being prevented from exploring because of the fear of not only our community where, there is that negative aspect, but more importantly, I think it was the trauma that they had that then was being passed on to me on top of the trauma that I was then also acquiring, I think when it hit home for me full circle with hip hop culture was in high school, when I actually met Devious and Rock Swift, who are the other two co-founders of the Great 1-8ers. At the time, I actually had transitioned and started to try out wrestling because I had never really tried out a sport. I was always that nerdy kid who was off in the corner. I was in the band, but I kind of kept to myself. And so wrestling and being able to build with Devious and Rock Swift in that environment as like human beings in that respect really helped me get out of my shell. And they introduced me to hip hop culture at that point in time. What's interesting about that was that we were all grieving at the time. I, at the time, was, in a world of pain with my own family. My parents had split up. My mom actually had kicked me out at the time in my senior year of high school as well, right before, graduating. And so there, and on the flip side, Devious and Rock Swift had just lost their father to an unfortunate medical situation. And so at that point, it was like we all were grieving, right? And they were gracious enough because their father rooted them in hip hop culture and raised them in that to be like, yo, we can't leave one of our crew behind, right? So I was the guy on the couch for our senior year in high school. I was the guy on their couch at the dojo. That was our home, right here in Pacoima. That's where all the magic happened, where Boogie Frantic lived, Tronic, Johnny Five, you know, all of us, you know, creating that environment. So for me, my introduction to hip hop was through me going through my struggles, my trials and tribulations, right? And it was a very special moment for me because that's when life started to like click and things started to make more sense, because now I had the opportunity to engage in all the different elements of myself by exploring the different elements of hip hop. You know, whether it was emceeing and listening to music with Rock Swift, or popping and dancing and going ham with Devious, you know, or even exploring outside with our homie Saver and doing some graph. You know, I think all those things for me played into that healing process. And for us, that's what made the Great One-Eighters. At that point in time, that's when we decided, you know, this is something that is a tool and a vehicle that goes far beyond ourselves. And we would be selfish to not share this out. So that was really what did it for us. It was our own lived experience, the fact that it changed our lives, the fact that, you know, I was the nerdy kid who then became houseless and was about to drop all my college and not go out there and not go to an Ivy League opportunity, but hip hop saved my life. You know, the Great One-Eighters saved my life. And same goes for Lorenzo and Rock Swift, you know, who were in a lot of ways grieving and could have gone a whole different direction, but it was hip hop and the Great One-Eighters coming together as a crew, as a community, that really held us together and helped us find the strength in our wounds in that sense. So it was camaraderie, honestly. It was brotherhood, sisterhood. It was the conversations we had with our brothers and sisters out there in Montreal who were struggling with very similar things, but a whole nother side of the galaxy in our mind. Because, you know, when you're from the hood, you just think of the hood. So I think that's what did it for us, was hip hop blew up the sense of community for us to an even greater, you know, pocket, and made us feel like we're a part of something that is important and not the, you know, pieces of crap that we were made to think we were because of the community that we grew up in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you definitely brought up a lot of interesting points, because, you know, when we're thinking of even our families coming from different places, right? And going through as you said, the trauma of like always wanting to be safe, being protected. You know, I think that translates to a lot of us too, of like what's out there. And I see it also here at the center, where that fear of like trying new things, or fear of going outside because of they need to be home, they need to be, you know, close by, you know, and it's I guess, as you said, at least having that outlet to release whatever, like the main thing of like releasing. So again, when you think of, as you said, hip hop as the medium, right? Because hip hop is a medium. Hip hop is, you know, just beyond the dance, beyond the, you know, what we associate it with. Definitely the expression needs to be released, right? And I think also too, it brings up the idea of, we're talking about community, of course, but, you know, you brought up a good point of hip hop, yes, was the thing that you were gravitated towards, but then you definitely mentioned the community between you guys as brothers, or as comrades, as, you know, knowing that there is a support system out there, that, yes, you know, through the dance, through the hanging out, through the music and all that, and the explorative curiosity that you guys had, there is a sense of community, even though underneath all of that, right? Even though when we see hip hop, there's a community, but then there's also that community that is shared between you guys as people, right? As humans, as you know, members of family. And I guess my question would be like, did that come first? Did you feel like that came first and then the hip hop as a community base, or is it the other way around? And again, Vlad, you could also come in and answer with your experience.
You know, I think what made and makes the Great One-Eighters great in that sense, in my mind, is that we took a lesson from hip hop and didn't shy away from bringing together different flavors and different styles. You know, I myself didn't grow up in hip hop. You know, I grew up in community organizing. I grew up in learning about the resistance of the guerrilleros in El Salvador. You know, I grew up in that realm, you know, in Chicanismo and being proud of being brown and whatnot, in a different way. Whereas Devious and Rock Swift really grew up in hip hop. So I think within the Great 1-8ers, and the beauty of it for me, as somebody who didn't grow up, you know, raised in hip hop culture, was that it was an opportunity. It was like a home that just continues to get bigger and welcomes other houses into that and continues to grow that home. And it's a very like I've studied a lot of like indigenous practices and indigenous knowledge and whatnot, and some of the elders have mentioned to me this concept of the big house, and the house that the tribe is under continues to grow as those connections start to get stronger. And so for us, I think it was really like coming at it from so many different angles, realizing that community was the common thread between all of it, you know. And I think what really sold it for us was that hip hop was very much a cultural resistance for us. It was us being able to resist the notion that we weren't gonna amount to much, and that there wasn't any talent, not only in Pacoima as the hood, but in the 818. You know, I think it was cultural resistance for us because it says, yes, while you all might think that we're gangbangers and drug addicts and pimps out here, and that that's all we are, we're not that. And we're going to show you through cultural and artistic excellence that will blow you out of the water. And so that, I think, is what really, for us, honed us into that idea and understanding that community is central to everything that we do, you know. And I think to your point earlier about, you know, trauma and really thinking about our own lived history, but our personal histories within our families is so important. In LA, we've done in the last couple of years a better job at archiving that, but honestly, racism through and through is still prevalent out here. And in Montreal, I think, just from my experiences and my research, I think that is also an issue that's been very salient, that's affected communities, but that hasn't really been addressed. You know, since the 1980s, Montreal has seen over a 30% increase in ethnic minorities, as some coin them, coming into the city. You know, it went from 5% to now 35% of Montrealers are people of color, and or indigenous folks. And so that's a huge a difference. If 1/3, 1 out of 3 people is a person of color, yet you're not being represented in the institutions, you're not being equitably provided not only like health benefits but education and job opportunities. I think that is something that when we think of cultural strategy and building community, it has to be central to the conversation, because we can't continue living in this colorblind world when Montreal in and of itself, just like LA, is built, it's colonized land, and we don't talk about it in that way in our day-to-day. We don't realize that the institutions that were built on colonized land continue the same things, even if we call them different things, and we don't address race and inequity in that respect. So that's why I think when it comes down to it, hip hop culture provides this opportunity to create this ecosystem for folks to not only heal themselves, but find themselves, but also to build themselves into the leaders that will then transform their own community, you know?
Yes.
Such as what you all are doing right here too. I mean, both of y'all are running it out there, you know, and doing your thing. And that's something that I find that's the future, you know, and I find that's who we need to double down on, whether it's in LA or in MTL, you know?
I love what you said about even going back to your previous point when it comes to the brotherhood and just adding that personal experience adds so much. There's a lot of wealth in that, in my opinion, because, you know, when you look at hip hop culture in general, the street dance culture and all of that, you know, we could look at it and because when I look at it from a distance, I still feel like, and I've mentioned that in one of my podcasts when I was doing it during the first lockdown, is that I am a guest in the hip hop culture when it comes to, even though, you know, I'm a black person or whatever, it is a reality that my heritage and how I came about to who I am today is a totally different experience from somebody who was born in America as a black or brown person, you know. So it's like, for me, the most important thing was to understand what it meant for the people, for the people out there, out on the West Coast, by traveling to LA, spending time again. Like when I stayed there for 3 months straight, there was time where I would spend 4 months. I would be around like a lot of in the Mexican community. You know, I had friends in Pomona and all of that, and then my understanding of the Black African experience and also in the Hispanic community made me understand something that when I came back, it was important for me to understand how it translates to how our lifestyle, because even though there are similarities, there are a lot of stuff that are different. And a lot of times I think as a community leader, what's really important is to understand historical facts and understand social political environments, but also understand how it translates to the environment in which you live, right? Because I would be a liar if I said that I went through the same struggles, or if we are going through the exact same struggle, even though there are similarities. And when we talk about community, when we talk about culture and all that, there's a deeper level of understanding that we need to have that can't just be about the dance. Because if the dance is what you do, that's cool. But if you're gonna have people that you're gonna be mentoring, if you're going to be organizing stuff, if you're going to be leading people, if you're going to be acting as somebody that people run to for counseling and all that, you need to elevate your knowledge and your understanding of your surrounding and your environment a lot more, you know, and be involved in things that go beyond the dance in order to be able to lead properly, you know. And and that's what came first for me. Like when I saw Crump for the first time, I knew that it was just more than movement, right? There's something raw about it that I felt was missing in my life. And when I was able to identify with other people who had the same need, I was like, oh, we have something in common. And it went beyond the skin color and age and sexual orientation and all of that. Because when I look at the diversity that we have in the Crump community, in the pop community in Montreal, it is very diverse. And of course, there are things that need to be addressed. But I feel like we're doing a good job, and we also need to highlight the positive things that are happening in our community in order for us to move forward. So that's kind of like my personal experience of how I came about when it comes to this whole community, you know, approach.
Yeah, I think wow. I think definitely this when we think of, let's say, dance community or dance, I guess, the culture, we also often forget that, you know, when it started with a group of people. It started with the interaction and the connection with the people before it was given necessarily a name. You know what I mean? It was the synergy amongst those people creating that magic that now we could say, after decades and decades later, that we're now, as you said, a guest, or enjoying the fruits of those labors, and hopefully contributing and growing more fruits. You know what I'm saying? And it's really understanding the social climate, the environmental climate, the people and their traditions, as well as their experiences and what they're bringing through either trauma or pleasure. These things do play a factor, and it's not, as you said, just the movement. Because when I was thinking about this, when I was approached, of course, with this panel, we can go so deep in terms of beyond the battle, because we know, like, once we get into battle mode, it just it's a whole other stretch, and then we just forget about everything else around us. But really, when we think of the dance did not start with the battle. You know what I'm saying? That was just a test, for us to see if we're mentally, mentally, physically, emotionally strong, or even spiritually strong. But it goes it started with community first. It started with the sharing, and getting down and being a part of that social experiment. You know what I mean? So yeah, definitely agree. And, you know, I think we could all say, you know, these sort of concerns do touch both MTL and LA, bringing in, you know, of course, all the, as you said, racial tension and what we go through. But I think this is why, I mean, I could speak only for myself, why, you know, dance I've chosen in a way to express whatever I want to express as myself, right? And hopefully be able to share with other people those same sort of emotions or feelings, I guess, that we can share together. And with that note, I'm gonna say, with your own experiences, I mean, how do you think, you know, we're talking about dance, but it could obviously relate to art or music or even, performance. How do you think that elevates society? And I say society, it can touch on dance culture, dance community, but I think society, we can talk about really like people. Like, how do you think us as a person, we use dance, we use art, how does that elevate society?
You want to start with that one, 7-Star?
Yeah, well, it definitely, it elevates. Well, from what I've seen, being a person that has been elevated by art, like, I could definitely say that when you look at, you know, the arts, the culture, and all of that, what I feel, what has been the biggest thing for me is fellowship, you know, brotherhood. I come from a sports background, right? I've always been a fan of dancing, but it was never something that I took seriously. And when my, you know, football career was done after college, because I sucked at school. When that was done, I didn't really have anything to invest my energy in, and school is not a thing for me. So having the chance to invest myself in something that was very similar to sports, in a sense where I was able to find that same physical energy and that same intensity that I was looking for into sports, and then channel all of that into that, really helped me as a person, and it elevated me because it challenged me on a creative tip. Like, what was cool about arts and culture and all that is that when you see artists putting stuff out there and being super creative, it automatically challenges people. It automatically challenges society. When you have a bunch of like little black boys that are going into like a park and they're just throwing a crump session and they're making noise, that's pure raw art. But anybody that's around that doesn't understand what's going on, they feel some type of way. Some of them are attracted, some of them are curious, some of them are scared. Like, so it creates, just, it's going to shake things up. And I think that's a beautiful thing, to be able to challenge people, make them feel uncomfortable, make them question themselves, right? Make them want to push themselves even further. So that's how society is challenged, because we cannot be stagnant as a society. And I think that artists are not getting enough credit for the fact that we are challenging people through art. We are challenging people through ideas, through innovation, through things that make people feel uncomfortable. People don't understand at the moment, but then it sparks something, and then years down the line, you're seeing a change from that very moment of something that happened 5 years ago. So this is why it's so important that we have to challenge, innovate, shake things up, make sure that we're not stagnant and we're taking things to the next level, you know. So that's what I feel arts is doing for society and how it impacts everybody.
Definitely, I definitely agree with you know, the points that were made. I think the things that stand out to me when I think about how art and culture elevates society, it really comes down to well, it's a lot of things, but I think for me right now, what's in the forefront of my mind's eye with COVID-19 and the pandemic and the uprising is that it provides an opportunity to really get into this alternative education. I think that especially hip hop culture, because of the richness and all of its elements, gives different entry points to youth, young people, adults alike, to be able not only to get into this fellowship that Seven Star mentioned, but also to explore their inner self, right? To explore their skills, to explore their capacity, their potential, their emotions, all that. To that front too, beyond education, because we all know our public education systems pretty much, at the very least within North America, and I think this is a shared concern, is that our public education is very restrictive in the ways that curriculum is kind of put forth. So arts, culture, and hip hop culture specifically provide an opportunity for youth, just like Seven Star was mentioning, who excel and have this intellect in something that might be not considered traditional intelligence, but very much is intelligence. And hip hop elevates that and gives an opportunity and a platform for that. One of my professors, Professor Trisha Rose, who's one of the leading female hip hop scholars, she, talks about prestige from below and how that was something that was extremely important within hip hop culture. It was the opportunity for young people and people without access to traditional classic art and society to be able to create opportunities for them to be able to have clout and respect. And now, because hip hop culture is international and global, we've created that network for all of ourselves that you can plug into. So no matter where in the world you are, you could be from the smallest, tiniest little village in India with, one internet connection at a cafe. But if you get down, you got mad respect and people will know you all across the world. And that's hip hop culture to me, giving that opportunity not only to educate, to get that prestige, but also to explore mental health, honestly, because, during this time of the COVID-19 pandemic, with the Great One-Eighters, we've been able to transition some of our programming online and our events online. We were one of the first to do the online battles during this time as well through Zoom. And it was a hit. It was an international hit. The most impacted countries with the highest COVID rates were the ones that were participating the most in the campaign and in the event. It was nuts. And what stood out to me was we did a bit of a survey of folks, and most folks talked about their mental health. The fact that the event really brought them back to this idea that there's a world beyond this, the tube that tells us that the world's going to hell. There is a world and a way to create a society and an ecosystem around us, a social ecosystem that is built on positivity and creation and not negativity and destruction, like the current capitalist white supremacist societies that we both in our shared experiences have to operate in. So I definitely feel that 100%. And I think that art is that vehicle to start the conversation and to posit the conversation in a way that is accessible to most people. Because just because we all use our mouths to communicate doesn't mean that people actually comprehend things the best that way. Sometimes it's better comprehended when it's done through a different medium. Like Seven Star was saying with Crump, there's an energy and a conversation that's taking place there that goes way beyond what the mind can even, like the logical kind of conscious mind can even understand. It happens in a spiritual plane in that sense. And so those are the things that I think elevate us within the arts, is connecting mind, body, soul, not only within ourselves, but within our communities in that respect.
Yeah, and I think bringing certain points there too that you guys have been saying is like this network, right? So like with hip hop, when we first started, right, of course it's prestige, but then you get to meet this is how we met each other and how we met you, and saying like, now, for example, we're in MTL. If you decide to come to MTL, you know us, right? We can chop it up, we can vibe, we can communicate, vice versa. We go to LA, same thing. And I think this is the beauty thing about hip hop, seeing the network that we have, right? And I think we could all say that when we meet someone, we know that when we go to their country or their place, like there's this understanding. there's just this, like, we know that we're in the same place. We know that we feel, or I guess we have the same sort of views where we're here to create, and like, we're in some ways always the underdog. We're always, we're always, in a way, we feel a little bit of the outsider, because again, it's still today hip hop, and it's being more and more well accepted, but I think we still know that hip hop is still kind of the, the parallel, you know what I'm saying? Through different system mediums that, would be still considered mainstream, or still considered, selective. So when we come together, things like that, I guess we could say that we kind of are on the same plane. But again, it's not to say devaluing, or I guess like taking away what we're doing. It's just another, as you say, another sort of value. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Because really the value is in the connection and the people that we are meeting, and that we're able to, I guess create change over there, and vice versa, or create things together, even though we're not in the same place. And I think that's a beautiful thing. I think this is also an aspect of community that I guess we just kind of not take for granted, but that we don't, I don't think there's, I couldn't say, or, I don't know everything, but I can say there's another network like this, that we can simply say like, okay, I come to someone's city, I battle, I vibe, I we spend a couple of days, we chop it up, whatever, and vice versa. And, in the end of the day, we can really come and, keep that connection going. And I think that's the power too, that we have, because this is how we grow. And I think this is how, as you said, like 7-Star, like you went to LA, you got to see how, people, live down there, and to talk with them and to vibe with them, and to also have that relate to your experience and understand where you stand in the dance, right?
Yeah, definitely. It happens in an organic way. And obviously, like you said, it doesn't happen in other spheres or other styles or communities, other than whatever is related to hip hop culture.
And I just wanted to uplift something too that Seven's really talking about, about just kind of building things out in the ways that you have with the family, with the crew and whatnot. And it was really about this concept of place-based approaches. That is very important when we think about community sustainability, whether it's within the hip hop community, or just the greater communities that we live in that respect. Place-based approaches are central to it. That's what makes hip hop amazing, right? Is that you can go to LA and you can go to MTL, and it's different vibes, but at the same time, it's all under the same values. And so the hip hop community accepts you, welcomes you, but your experience in Montreal keeps you wanting to come for more, because it's different from the experience you have out here in Los Angeles. And so in that respect, I think being able to ensure that whatever is done, whether it's done within our own, hip hop community and culture that's international, or as we think about how to impact our communities using hip hop, we should think about place-based approaches, because that's how you get the community buy-in, right? That's how you make sure that you're not creating these top-down approaches, that you're listening to community needs, and that you're being responsive in that sense, and that you're not creating this one-size-fits-all. Like, that's why it's so important that we have this concept of the crew in hip-hop culture. It's built into the essence of hip-hop. It basically, I think of two things that were around before we called hip-hop, and it was the cipher and the crew. That was community. That is and that will forever be hip-hop culture. And the crew, in a lot of ways, to me, when we think of, again, how hip-hop can inform the larger community development, it provides an opportunity to basically build an advisory committee. These are all artists, creatives, people who live in the community, who have an investment in building their community, and these are the issues that they're hearing from their brothers and sisters out here. This is how we can come together and help push the message, And so I think that kind of concept is extremely important, having, definitely exchange being at the very forefront of everything.
Yes, I definitely do agree with that. And I mean, it's like we're peeling, a bit of an onion in some ways, because it definitely touches every aspect of everyone's life, and everyone has their own story to tell. So bringing it back to basically what our needs are, because we've definitely brought up a lot of different concepts. But the idea of community, and again, could be universally used, is what do you think is the basic need or needs for like a community to thrive? Like, what do you think are the needs?
I love what P-Boogie said about the bottom up. You know, a lot of people have this elitist way of seeing things. You know, and they think that, oh, because we have a community, we have this hierarchy that goes from top to bottom. You know, you have these people that are calling the shots, and when the reality is that the leadership comes from everywhere. It comes from the bottom. It comes from the side. And for me, it's like, I think like one of the main things that changed in my personal immediate surrounding is when, as a leader, I started to really think about creating more leaders. You know what I'm saying? And this is the thing, like, we're not going to be here forever. And that's the reality, you know, like, so leadership, everybody is in a leader in their own way. And we need to empower the youth, empower the people who come after us, and make them understand that they have some leadership power. And there's not one single definition of being a leader. You know what I'm saying? Like, you could be a leader in certain aspects. Like, I'm a leader in the Crumb community, but I have people that I follow and that mentor me in other aspects of my life. You know what I'm saying? But to give people a chance to voice their opinion and take ownership and leadership of certain things that they feel like they could contribute to the community and help the community grow. Because me personally, being in charge of a community is hard. It's exhausting. You make a lot of mistakes. And if you take that burden upon your shoulders, and you don't spread the wealth, and you don't delegate, you don't allow people to take their space, then you're not doing your job as a leader. You know what I'm saying? You also got to play the role of a servant. You know what I'm saying? So in my case, I feel like what I'm seeing right now is in the hip hop community around the world, in different places that I've had a chance to go to, is that there's a lot of growth that's happening. There's more attention, that people are paying a lot more attention to hip hop, you know, either at a mainstream level or whatever, on the community level. But we need to build even more leaders. We need to have more people who have literacy when it comes to going out there on a social tip, on a financial tip, on a political tip, and really be out there and open our minds and understand that, yes, hip hop dance in my case is what I'm about. But like I said at the beginning of this, we need to go beyond, because it is not true that what we're doing stays at that level. It goes beyond that. So let's create more leaders that are each issued from our community and are able to help us strive and help us be more equipped to be able to grow in the proper way, you know? So this is the change that I've seen in my immediate circle. Like, I'm really trying to build other leaders around me.
Definitely. And you know, to that point on leadership and community, and that being, you know, one of the most needs, especially youth leadership, I definitely wanted to uplift something that I found and kind of doing some like research. Like, as I was preparing for this panel, this conference. So just recently in June 2020, there was a report on systemic racism and discrimination in the city of Montreal that was released by the Office of Public Consultation of Montreal. And it was pushed by the uprising during this time, the civil uprising. There was the anti-racist movement that was building up in Montreal, pretty much pushed for them to create this report, which came out with a list of demands in regards to really building a more equitable society for everyone in Montreal and addressing the racism of Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities. And so I think when it comes to some of the needs, and in really looking at even just kind of the disparate impact of COVID-19 in Montreal and in the specific communities that it's impacted, like northern, I believe it's called Montreal Nord, which is where it's like the Black communities, Haitian communities, Arab communities, poor communities, working class frontline health and social service workers that are the most impacted. And so the reason it's like, when you see that, it's like, you ask yourself why, right? And a lot of it has to do with the inability to access an actual good standard of living. You know, when we're talking about food deserts, the inability for people to have access to fresh and healthy food, talking about lack of green space, you know, that's that 7-star was saying, the opportunity to be able to go to a park that's safe, that's open for you to be able to jam out, you know, and actually create. Insufficient infrastructure, which I think goes along with 7-star's point. Infrastructure is physical, but it's also social. So it's very much, where's my community center and where's my community leaders to help run that community center? So we need more of that cultural and civic infrastructure to make sure that the community has that social safety net that is, again, place-based within those boroughs specifically. And just more access, I think, in general to transportation is something that's imperative, especially as things open up, to make sure that people have equal access to opportunities within that. And really just to bring it kind of like home to where this really correlates with arts and culture, is that arts and culture is the vehicle for this messaging. But it's also the impetus. It's what pushes a lot of this change. I want to kind of go into a little story of some work that we did in Providence, Rhode Island. Through hip hop culture, we had worked together to bring up and actually empower some of the local artists over there, the hip hop heads that were the dancers, the DJs, the MCs, and the graph artists. And we put together a program that taught youth from the projects out there, 2 different rival projects, about hip hop culture and the different elements, with an overlay of teaching them about food justice and food security, right? And in that, we had a component where we had an urban farm connected to the projects. So we would do arts projects and we would be able to integrate it into the urban farming getup. You know, by the end of it, you know, we had kids rapping about, you know, the importance of them being able to have the things that they need to be able to survive and thrive. We had both rival neighborhoods at a jam session in together in the same hood, with the cops being like, what the hell? Why are people killing each other? So it was hip hop that not only helped those communities heal their social disconnect, but also it provided a vehicle to be able to give this message to people in a culturally responsive way. And that makes it relevant in that sense. And it doesn't make it so that, again, it's top down. Some person from the opposite side of Montreal who doesn't even know what the hell I live telling me that I need to eat my veggies ain't gonna make me eat my veggies, you know? Like, real talk. So I think that's like kind of when we kind of think full circle, and the power, that's where our power is as artists, as credible messengers from our community.
Yeah, because that's, I think, where, you know, I find there's somewhat a disconnect. And I think it's just a question of maybe we just don't know, or maybe, you know, we don't know how to connect the dots of certain things. Because, yeah, when I think of community as I get older or mature, as I get more mature, I often see it more, as I said, like the people that surrounds me, right? So it's, you know, when we're young, we're so gung-ho on what we're doing. But then you realize you need that support system. You do need a healthy place to live. You do need, you know, as you said, like places where you can find healthy alternatives. You know what I mean? As we see that, okay, more to life is these basic needs for anybody to live, right? Fresh air, you know, as a you know, green grass, you know, trees, we need oxygen, you know, to breathe. Those are very basic things that we learn in elementary, but like we totally forget about it. And at the same time, how do we connect what we're doing already in our life to either encourage or sustain these things? And that's a question I ask myself too, right? And I think that's really, I think what I would think we're kind of getting at, right? Because we would want, as we mature, or as you said, pass on the baton, I guess, to the other leaders. They too have to have something to look forward to. They also have to have some sort of hope. And there's also has to be space for that to create and to grow from, right? So I think when we talk about, it's us as mentors, I guess, sharing our experiences, sharing what we kind of know, and as well, hoping that they're opening their eyes to themselves. It's also, I guess, having that kind of hope that there is work to be done, but yet the work is happening. Because when we don't see the work happening, sometimes that's the thing that discourages us, right? So it's like, what's it for?
Yeah.
You know, definitely. So I don't know if you want to add on to that sort of sentiment, but
yeah. Well, the thing is, the reason why I'm putting so much emphasis on creating other leaders, and I mentioned the word ownership a lot, is because while being aware of certain issues that we're going through, I was born in Montreal North. That's interesting, Pete, that you're saying this, because I work there a lot, and I actually was teaching a workshop there yesterday at a high school with, like, they're all young adults that haven't graduated from high school. We're trying to, motivate them through Crump and all that. So I'm very familiar with the situation there. And one thing that I'm really heavy on is when I talk about leadership and ownership, it kind of puts people in a position where they feel like they don't have to depend on a system to see change. Because every time we're seeing change is because of people that take the initiatives of making that change. So yes, we need to be able to point out the problems and the injustice and all of that, but there's also that part of me that's always putting that mirror in front of myself and saying, all right, but what am I doing to actually work towards that change? Also, it can't just be one directional thing. It has to come from both ways. And when I'm talking about leadership, and every time I'm giving space to a youngin for him or her to kind of take part of something, to be part of something, take ownership of their own actions, their own life, their own situation, it feels like that's where the hope kicks in, because you feel like, yes, there needs to be change, but I could also be the change. There needs to be a difference, but I am the difference. It doesn't start from outside necessarily, it comes from within, you know what I'm saying? So I think that through leadership and through preaching ownership, what we're doing is we're also instilling values that create a stronger youth, because they're about action and about being that change, instead of asking for it. And as much as I understand the stuff that we're going through, I also am able to identify some of the things that we lack as a community, and we have to be able to point that out. We have to be able to look at ourselves and say, okay, what is it that we're doing that we could do better and be better at? So I feel like, for me, leadership, ownership, and mentorship are three things that allow us to be stronger, you know what I'm saying, and have more control over our future. So that's why I kind of like to put emphasis on that.
Definitely. And I think, you're really bringing home some of the concepts that I think in the United States are being implemented a bit more now too. But I think the game has been a bit more, at least the language and the practice around it has been greater in other countries, like Australia, within certain Aboriginal communities. But it's the concept of trauma-informed approaches and really healing-centered approaches. And those two things are integral to anything that we do. Trauma informs how the systems in your community impact you, but you're always healing-centered, making sure that you're building the individual. I think one of the things that I work and I consult with the county government out here in LA, and one of the things that we were kind of contending with when we were talking about youth development programming countywide was, making sure that programming always had some level of like social justice component, right? But then in that conversation, realizing that when you have a program that's just social justice oriented, a lot of the times what you do is you actually take that youth who is from the hood that felt already disempowered. And by you explaining all these other powers that work against them, not only in their city, in their county, in their nation, in their world, what's that going to do? It makes them kind of like, well, I guess I'm just going to hit the streets because the world's all screwed up and yeah, whatever. And so at that point, we do a disservice, right? Because we're not building them up at the same time educating them. So I think, you know, Seven brings up an amazing point that for me hit home when I was out in college. One of my mentors, when I was just like all over the place, like freaking overwhelmed with life. But he told me something that's really helped me get through even just the tough times out here with, you know, POTUS over here with the president of the United States being the way that he is, you know, and really pushing white supremacy has been, for me, it's like you think global and you act local, you know, and that's our motto too for our nonprofit as well. You know, you make sure that you understand what's going out and you keep your head on the swivel, but at the same time that you're constantly using the things that the creator gave you, whether it's the knowledge, the skills, the being, the voice, to be able to change your community. And I realize that that's what's held, at least me personally, down. And I think it's held us down during this crazy time out here. You know, when I've talked to other folks who I know kind of deal with less stressors in their life, and they're like, yeah, I'm so overwhelmed and everything's just going to crap. And then I'm here kind of with a more chipper attitude, like, hey, like we're putting up this mural and we're doing this dope thing where we're connecting with some Montreal heads, da, da, da. And it's like, people just don't know how to live in that positivity. And a lot of the times it's because of just kind of the tunnel vision that we get. And that's why it's important to break that kind of echo chamber through a lot of what, you know, Seven was mentioning, you know, and I'm like grateful that this conversation is happening, because it's just showing at that sense that, you know, our communities within hip hop culture have been strong, have been pushing this and have been implementing this. And, you know, I said it in the beginning and I'll say it again. These are the things that the city of Montreal needs to be investing in, you know, because everything that's outlined in that report is exactly what you all are living and doing in your day to day. You feel me?
Yep. And I think it's interesting because you mentioned a great point. I mean, both you guys. It's, you know, when we, as you said, when you're laid with all these facts of things, right? It's sometimes very hard to swallow, and that's why I said about leaving some sort of hope in a way, because it can be discouraging. And I think, as if we're going again back with art, the idea is like we're giving kind of like the tool, either it's a paintbrush, whether it is, you know, a step, whether it is a musical note, whatever. You're giving actually the person to feel empowered because they're doing it themselves and actually seeing that they can actually do something great, you know, whatever it is. And I think we tend to not, if we don't try, we never know. And that's the thing with art. I think the beauty of art is like it makes people want to try something. And then because there's so much about art and so many different ways of doing art, there's no one way where you have to feel fixed. And if you're not good at that, well, there you go, it's over, right? And I think there's two things, like two questions that can come out of what you both just said. And going back to you, Seven Star, is that the idea of like, what do you think is actually lacking? You know, because you mentioned about lacking, like you can tell from lacking. That's
my main thing is do we look at our needs first? Like that's one of the things that we do a lot of times when we're trying to move a project forward, like a program. Let's say, for example, like we have the Leaders Program, when the Montreal Crump Alliance Leaders Program. This is a section that is dedicated to empowering women through Crump, right? Now, with Valerie Taminator, we've been doing our thing and all of that. Now, what are the things that we need in order to empower women through Crump? We need to assess the community. We need to learn how to assess a community. Like those are basic skills as leaders. You know, you need to understand how to address your own community. you need to be having like some sort of also financial, financial literacy, like learning how to organize, learning how to, all those basic skills that you need when you get into like when you start an organization. Because if you're doing great art and your movement is cool and you're doing all of that, it really doesn't matter if you're not able to be up to par when it comes to organization, because there's a standard out there that goes beyond dance. You get what I'm saying? Because when you present yourself as an organization, especially a nonprofit, you automatically put yourself in the same category as other organizations that probably been out there doing their thing and putting things together, putting projects together and all of that. So there's a little, like, we're in a competitive environment. So we need to see, okay, how can we equip ourselves to not only keep doing what we're doing, but also to have some sort of literacy, knowing that a lot of us don't have degrees or diplomas and all that. And a lot of times, yes, we didn't get what we wanted because based on the fact that we were discriminated against because of what we're doing. But there's also that other flip side of me that was like, all right, but what have you been doing to upgrade your knowledge about learning how to navigate through this environment? Because the minute that I did it, then, I started seeing change. So that's like, it shows you that, yes, that you're able to identify the problems, but you also need to see, like, is there something that I can do and take in charge and take the initiative to change that? So for me, it's like knowledge of self, learning how, like, one of the best examples, and this is something that people don't want to talk about, but I've been dealing with a lot of cases where the young women came up to me saying that they were abused by a certain person, that person. And then you realize that, hey, are we even equipped to learn how to deal with that? And then you realize that, oh, hell no, we're not. So how are we supposed to move forward as a society or as a community if we're not even able to create some safe spaces for people to get together? So now I had to seek professional organizations that are dedicated to that and ask a question, go to the police station, like do all of that. You know what I'm saying? So I'm like, oh, we're lacking something right now because this is probably something that we didn't pay enough attention to. And now when it hits the fan, that's when we react. You know what I'm saying? So for me, it's like all knowledge about, okay, what do we need to create safe spaces? What do we need to address the discrimination? What do we need to address this and that? So it's always about being in this this mindset of gathering more knowledge and more tools to build a healthy community. Not only the dance, not only the ciphers, not only the battles. It goes beyond that. And I think that I'm not afraid to say that we lack some of it, and we have to step our game up when it comes to that. And we also need to address the BS that's happening on the other side and point it out. You know what I'm saying? So to me, it's always about balance. I understand the problems, but there's a part of me that doesn't want to be just a victim. Like, I can make that change also. You know what I'm saying? So these are the things that I think we're lacking.
Definitely. And just to that point, I think within hip hop culture, there's like more of a transitioning happen now, but I think the kind of like status quo has very much been that we've how do I kind of put it, we've kind of like pigeonholed ourselves in certain roles within our own hip hop community. That's prevented us from really looking at ourselves as whole people a lot of the times. It's like, in order for you to be the dope dancer, then all you gotta do is talk about dance, speak about dance 24/7, not have any other like thoughts in your mind, just be doing head spins all day, and it's like, does that really, in the grander scheme of things, make you a dope dancer? And really, does that actually prepare you to live and thrive in this world? And so I think in a lot of ways, the work that's being done right now in communities, like what you're mentioning, 7-Star, through your nonprofit, like what you're doing, Sam, through the nonprofit you're with, and through the Great 1-8ers and Woke and Forward movements, I think it's really showing folks that there is this other way, that hip hop excellence doesn't always look like, and I'm gonna say it, being broke and living at your mom's house for the rest of your life. Because I know damn well a lot of the veterans in our own communities, like they're dope, they're up there, they're handling business, but their lives, holy hell. We've been helping OGs since the very beginning of the Great One-Eighters to try to like stabilize themselves, find some additional hope and everything. So it's like, just because, you know, you've reached a certain level of thought excellence within your artistry doesn't mean that you're a stable person, that you have the stability you need. And a lot of ways for us as the Great One-Eighters, that's been paramount. Like we're in the business of making great people, you know, being a dope dancer and being a dope artist and all that other stuff, that's secondary. You know, what's more important is for you to have those tools, because whether you're still popping now, or 10 years from now, I care less about that than you having the things that you need to be happy in your life and not be on the struggle bus anymore, elevating, you know? So that's, I think, as we move forward with these types of initiatives within hip hop culture, of bringing it back to what the forefathers and foremothers put out there of building community and using our tools to build community, we got to always think that as paramount. You know, hip hop has always been about the people first and everything else second, you know? It's just a matter of how do we uplift one another, and it's going to look differently based on different situations, you know?
Yeah. And a lot, I mean, it's crazy because I feel like the past couple of years has definitely changed. I mean, I think for sure, because we've matured, we've grown. So we also have different viewpoints of how we were handling things years ago. You know, now we see the importance of creating, as you said, safe space. Now it's important to, you know, these things can help us in our own healing and our own trauma, where people feel comfortable enough to say, hey, I've been hurt. I need help. Whereas before, you know, you just suck it up and go on your way because, you know, who you're going to talk to. You know, these are things that now it's also education, and it's also having empathy. I think that we're learning the idea of what it means to be empathetic to each other, and to know that what we're doing is affecting each other, whether it's directly or not directly. Whereas before, you know, I think, you know, because you brought up, you know, women and stuff. I mean, I could, you know, just thinking of that now, I could see, wow, this is like very important to have this, this strength in that. But back then was not talked about. It wasn't encouraged to talk about, you know, being a female or in hip hop and things like that. It's just, you suck it up. You just do what you had to do because you didn't want to be considered weak. And that's just like a part of it. But this also brings up the idea of, like, you know, we brought up organization. And again, that idea, you know, why are we competing? We shouldn't be competing if the goal is supposed to be helping the community. And if there is common links, we should be able to connect and create bigger change, because then there's more help in that direction, as opposed to like, I'm here, you're here, I'm here, and do I have a degree? No, I don't. Even though these things are important, I think it's just like, you know, those things too is like, those are stopping us from actually wanting to do what we need to do, because now we're always worried about other people's perspective of what is valuable, or what is, you know, but I do agree that, yes, you know.
I just want to add something when it comes to competing.
Yeah.
You know, I think that there's a healthy way of competing. There could be healthy competition. And it took me years to understand that my vision of competition had to change throughout the years. You know, I can't see competition, and not even on a dance level, but just in general. There's a way of having this healthy competition with your peers and the people around you, while remaining while having these different collabos, or like, you know, Forward Movement is a dance company, like it's a nonprofit. Montreal Compromise is a nonprofit. You know, we're both nonprofits, but we have different missions. You know what I'm saying? So, but we could help each other out in growing. You know what I'm saying? And that could also happen at a dance level. You know, and that's why I love the crunk world, because we be battling every week, every Wednesday evening outside like it was the last day. Like, we going at it as if like, as if we were mad at one another. But then when the battle is done, we go out and eat, like, because we're like, that's the only way we know how to elevate one another. And that's it. That when you establish that type of culture within your community, then you understand, okay, well, this is how it is. And it takes a lot of level-headed people and good leaders to be able to establish that type of culture. So it's a great responsibility. So this is what I mean. I just want to make that clear when it comes to competing with one another. I think there's a healthy way to go about it, right? So
and
Go
go
ahead.
ahead. I was like, to add to that, I think, kind of plain and simple, people of color are always kind of put in these situations where we have to kind of rationalize an irrational situation. We shouldn't be having a fight for the money that is rightfully needed and belongs to the community that's there paying the taxes, XYZ. So first I want to kind of start off with that, because this is the primary issue, is that the white supremacist, colonist, capitalist systems that we operate put these restrictions and bureaucracy in place to have us in contest with one another instead of helping build these communities. So a big part of it is, in addition to just, I think, having this healthier idea of competition and collaboration, it's really for government to do its part to start looking at mission-based funding and not project-driven funding. That's a big difference. Just like Seven Star was talking about, you have two different missions within those dance organizations. So I shouldn't be having to compete for this one pot of money that's based on dance projects if we're both impacting the community, albeit through dance, in two separate ways. So mission-driven, mission-based funding is key. But a lot of the times, project-based funding is what's pushed by governments, including Montreal, because it's easier for them to be able to restrict and keep things a lot more tightly knit, right? And only fix some coffers of funding. Additionally to that, I think it's also like, who's in charge of distributing those funds? If more of the funds that were meant to be distributed to community, actually, if community was given the decision-making power to be able to do it, things would be distributed in a more equitable way, because people with lived experience from that community would be able to say, this is worthwhile. We see them doing their thing. And instead of, this $3 million organization keeps getting all the fat grants, but all they're doing is one advocacy program a year with one big fundraising event. And while they say they reach 1,000 people, it's 1,000 people with one fundraising event. When we reach, we might reach 500, but we reach 500 every single damn day, 365 days a year. A year, right? So in that sense, it's different, breadth versus depth. So I think as much as looking at collaboration is important, using our arts and our culture to advocate for our communities to be able to have access to these funds is important as well, because there's a lot that's held up by bureaucracy.
yeah, well, and I totally agree with you. And my thing is that it is important for us to be responsive and not reacting to these things when we see these issues. And what I mean by that is, when I see certain organizations that are all of a sudden pushing diversity, all of a sudden talking about being inclusive, we have to be careful, because a lot of times when they're putting that narrative on the forefront is because they need to get with the times so that they could keep getting the funding. So I'm more interested in having people from the community that are in these positions than having these organizations making promises. And this is where it brings me back to the leadership aspect. Like, we need to be in those places, because when you're in a position of power and you position yourself, then you can make change. You know what I'm saying? I hear what you're saying. Everything that you're saying is making a lot of sense, but also it's like, is it, maybe it's me like being like super, and I don't want to sound negative or a pessimist, but it's like, we can't wait for them to just say like, yo, all of a sudden you were hearing all these narratives. Like, I'm not impressed by that. I'm not impressed by people, oh yes, we're against this and that and white supremacy and this and that. I'm like, cool, fine. My thing is that that's what's hot. And that's what you need to be saying in order for you to get the funding, you know? So we need to be level-headed and still have our mind clear and understand the game that's being played here. You know what I'm saying? And that's what I mean by, like, you know, leadership, educating ourselves, being sharp and being savvy on every aspect, you know, as much as possible in order for us to be able to fight these things, you know?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm gonna go on to the questions because I have at least, I believe, 2. So I'm gonna start with Victoria here. Her question here says, do you consider youth work a vital part of a community leader's work?
I'm gonna let P-Boogie answer that first, because I know he be getting busy with that.
Do you need me to repeat, or you got the question?
Can you repeat it one more time?
Do you consider youth work a vital part of a community leader's work?
Definitely, 100%. If it's not the most important part, it's definitely on top priorities. I think a lot of the issues that we deal with in our societies out here in the United States and in Canada, especially within communities of color, are things that start at a very young age. You know, we talk about these things called social determinants of health, and how when you, at a young age, are limited and restricted from access to certain things, that actually, even if you get those things later on in your life, you actually are still put at a disadvantage. And so when we think about, you know, community strategies and community development and community leadership, youth work is like paramount, and I think should always be involved. And I think you mentioned something, Sam, the beginning, about things needing to be intergenerational, and that's super key. No matter who's being served at whatever point in time, whether it's youth to youth, youth to adults, or youth to elders, there always needs to be youth involvement, because that's how our societies have very much broke down our ability to create that village, right? It's our communications are all kind of stagnant. If we see youth work as separate from community work, that perpetuates the same disconnect that, you know, actually makes our communities, you know, not necessarily mesh well in that respect.
Yeah, I can't really add anything to that, man. The only thing that I would say is that I would go as far as saying that it is the most important part. You know, if you know, like that saying that says, you know, it's easier to build the strong youth than fix broken adults. You know, like if we're thinking long term, then it makes no sense not to put that as a priority. So yes, I believe that it is considered primary, not even vital. This is like there needs to be something dedicated to that, and it needs to be taken very seriously, in my opinion.
All right, I do agree. So I have I believe one more question, unless there's more people that want to ask. This is the time, because time is running out. And so I have an anonymous here, but definitely is a nice juicy one. This says, as people coming from marginalized communities, cultures, who often have the other side waiting for us to make mistakes, how can we address our collective issues and or problems and uplift ourselves as a whole without jeopardizing the community? Now, this is a little bit of a mouthful, but I'm going to repeat it again because there's a few angles here. As people come from marginalized communities or cultures who often have the other side waiting for us to make mistakes, how can we address our collective issues and or problems and uplift ourselves as a whole without jeopardizing the community?
You want to take a stab at that first?
Yeah, I mean, and I hope that I really grasped the question properly. I wish I could read it somewhere just to help me out. I don't know. I don't see it in the.
If you hit Q&A at the bottom.
Oh, Q&A right there. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
As a, who often have the outside waiting for us to make mistakes? How can we address our collective issues or problems to uplift ourselves as a whole? I think that there's not really like a set answer to that or a solution, but it really starts with having the tough discussions amongst ourselves. Me personally, I feel like there's a lot, even after 15 years of being part of a community and all that, it is fascinating to me that there are, and it makes sense because, like you said, Sam, about the maturity, you reach a certain level in your life where you're somewhere else, but it's definitely conversations that I'm having right now with the homies that I was like, wow, I wish that we would have these conversations, that we had these conversations before, or even that everything that we're talking about right now, that we have the courage to open it up to the world, open it up to our community, and have these tough exchanges and all that. Because I feel like a lot of the problems that we're going through right now is always based on communication, even on a more interpersonal level, in relationships and all that. Communication is key. And if we're not able to have honest, transparent communications among ourselves, it's going to be hard for us to tackle the issues in a healthy way, in my opinion. So that's, for me, it's the first step. It's like communicating with one another and having these tough conversations that need to happen. And of course, we could look at the fact that, other side is waiting for us to make mistakes. And we're going to make mistakes. You know what? We're going to mess up, but it's all about how we bounce back, because we've messed up. I've messed up plenty of times, to the point where I was like, oh, I ain't going to come back from this one. And you know what? Nah, let's go. Like, we made a mistake, and let's just bounce back and see how we could all come together and move forward. So it is a very tough question, but I believe that it all starts with things like this. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is the positive side of COVID. COVID made us think a different way. Like, now we're thinking outside the box, and I don't know if we would be having these conversations right now if it wasn't for us being forced to be doing online and stuff and all that. So it's like, hey, we have the tools. Let's just start by talking and discussing and having conversations and exchanges, verbal exchanges, not only on the dance floor, but verbally, more often on tough subjects, and being able to hear each other out.
Definitely. And I think something that comes to mind in the very beginning is we have to decolonize our minds first and foremost, and not like Seven Star mentioned, wait for the other side, quote unquote, to validate our experience and to validate our actions. Realizing too that they've made plenty of mistakes and that's why we're here to begin with. So don't even sweat, a thing or two, because the biggest mistakes have already been created and we're only going up from here at that point. In terms of how we can address our collective issues and problems, I have a few suggestions, but there's definitely like a whole practice around this that really is rooted in what Seven Star mentioned, communicating and relating with one another. But healing circles is something that's extremely important. Having opportunities and spaces that you're creating for affinity groups, people who identify both within your community and even just within the community itself, the subsectors. There needs to be healing circles and healing spaces for people to be able to share their traumas and be able to start working towards healing that. I think an important thing to do to address kind of collective issues in communities is make sure that you uplift the lived experiences of impacted people. A lot of the times, we don't do that. A lot of the times it's the organizational advocate or caseworker that helps that person that's there speaking on their behalf. And while they're still providing good testimony, it's still not the same as that actual person living it. So I think going into communities and centering our actions for helping that community around the needs of the most impacted, you're always going to win that way, because the liberation of the people who are most oppressed is the liberation for all. That was the premise of Black Lives Matter. That is the premise of Black Lives Matter. And that's the premise of liberation as a whole when we talk about liberation work, and reconciling our societies. I think also give yourself space to just be. I think it's so important right now that there's a call to action for building leadership in our communities, for us to, continue and to embolden the work that we're doing, but we also have to give ourselves that time to be able to refresh, to sharpen the saw, and to be able to exchange. And I think, again, bringing it back full circle, that's where we have the magical superhero power of hip hop, because that is not only the tool that we use to create, but it's the tool that we use to heal, right? And so having that ability and exploring things that both allow you to do, but also to be, are very important, very important. And so I think that as we continue this fight around marginalized communities, working towards social justice and racial justice, we have to also just think back at, what have First Peoples been doing from the very beginning, because they're still around and they've been the ones that have been oppressed the most. And a lot of the times it's you double down on your culture, you create these codes for you to be able to share your stories and narratives, and you try to uplift your people first, and you help everyone from there at the same time, So I think those strategies are things to at least help, start off the way.
I'm going to say, we can talk so much more with this because these are such amazing points, because it's, in the end of the day, we're talking about life. In the end of the day, we're talking about connection. In the end of the day, we're talking about family. And then, it's like, and these sort of things is not just one. You guys both brought very interesting and somewhat, not say different, but just in a different spectrum, but yet we're all speaking the same language. And it's really, as you said, communication, keeping the connection, intergenerational, and then that's all communication, really. At the end of the day, all of that is summed up to one word, is communication, whether it's through, older to young, sister to brother, land to person, you know what I'm saying? Because again, it's the environment that we live in is being impacted as well. And I just want to say really thank you guys very much for this discussion, because I think this was really what needed to be said. I just want to close off because I have Nicholas here who sent a beautiful ending message for us. He said, "Thank you very much, everyone, for sharing. It was really interesting and inspiring. With much respect and appreciation, Nicholas Vision." So I really want to say thanks for everyone who tuned in and was a part of this, because again, this is the beginning, and hopefully has sparked a little something for all of us. And again, thank you all for this excellent educational conversation for Sam the Mediator and to organizational equipe. Thank you, Victoria, Mackenzie. Really appreciate that. And
I just want to say thank you, Samantha, for allowing us to chop it up. And well, it was a pleasure and an honor to meet you, P-Boogie. I know it's like a first time meeting. We doing this through the web, but definitely I'm interested in next time I fly out to the West Coast. We're gonna chop it up, and I'm inspired by your work, brother. Keep it up.
Igualmente. Thank you so much for welcoming us to the space right here and allowing us to really have a seat at the table as you guys really figure out how you're going to be putting your strategies together for Montreal and how to really continue supporting your work, and know that you always have supporters out here in the West Coast. However we can uplift, elevate, and add value to the work that's being done out there. I myself personally, and I know our organization draws so much inspiration from Montreal and the scene out there and the people out there. We're watching all the time, from our young ones to our elders. And for us, Montreal is our second home. And so this is why it means so much for us to be able to share space. And we're super excited at going into this next chapter as we open back up and start to recover from COVID, to build together and continue this exchange, to show people how this hip hop culture is global.
That's it. This is about the communication, the network, the connection, the community. This is exactly it. It's worldwide. So again, thank you. Thank you again, Forward Movements. Thank you. Kairos Festival. This is awesome. Hoy, do you want to say anything as I close off?
You said it all. Thank you so much for being part of this. It was a beautiful conversation. Thank you for everyone that tuned in. I just wanted to end it on this. We also have 2 upcoming conferences. Next week, we have a Femme Phenomenal on the 26th, happening at 7:30 p.m. And Samayam is going to be on that panel as well. So that's going to be very interesting. So that's it for me, really. Thank you so much for this evening.
Looking forward to checking y'all out in MTL. And if you